Hi, I'm Andrew Wasson from Creative Guitar Studio. Thanks for tuning in to my weekly guitar blog where we cover questions that get sent in to the guitar blog website that I run at andrewwasson.com. If you have questions for me, go to the andrewwasson.com contact page and send me a quick email. Be sure to include the city and state and country that you're from. Stands a far better chance of me featuring your question on one of my websites that way. Now, the first question that we're going to look at is from David out in Toronto, Canada. He wrote into the guitar blog saying, I've been playing guitar for quite a while now, and I'm quite good at coming up with different licks in any key that I need. I also know a lot of scale modes, but I run into a lot of trouble when playing over rhythm guitar's chord progressions, seeing as I can't figure out which scale modes fit over each chord. Is there a way to find this out, or is it trial and error? Well, it's funny that you should say trial and error because a piece of it is definitely trial and error, but there are theoretical ways to work with this as well. The only problem is, you know, in a very constrained situation, let's say if you're hired as a session dude, you know, to go jump into a band and play a top 40 gig one night or something, make a couple $100, you know, you're going to get sometimes songs fired off at you that weren't part of the initial set list that you're going to have to basically learn on stage. And no matter how your career goes as a musician, I bet you $1 that at some point you're going to have to basically learn a song off the cuff and even possibly play a solo over it. So this is where our good friends, the pentatonic scales, come in to being very handy. Let me just give you a quick example of something that would be kind of funny to think about theoretically. I'll just throw together a quick set of chord changes that I know don't really operate together, and I'll explain something that you can use to try and tackle these situations. Now, maybe just as a preamble to this, I do have to state that it is very important for everyone who's studying music, and especially improvising, to get a really good handle on all your harmony, you know, not just your scales, so not just knowing the notes of the scale, but also the chords that happen to follow along with those notes. That's scale harmony. That's sometimes what people will refer to as chord scales, because it's like you're walking through the scale with a series of chords. That stuff is integral. It becomes even more important when you start studying the harmonies that interact between major and minor key centers, as well as modal harmonies. I've got lots of stuff on the Creative Guitar Studio YouTube channel covering modes. In fact, right at this moment, I'm kind of in the thick of things doing Phrygian modes. So if you want to learn more about that stuff, definitely mosey on over to the Creative Guitar Studio YouTube channel and check that stuff out. But let's get into this progression I was telling you about, because this is kind of a typical, you know, stage thing you might get thrown at some point. The chord changes I want to throw your way are going to be an A major to a G major to an E major. So that sounds like, you know, maybe your typical 60s or 70s, maybe even early 80s standard rock or rock blues type progression, maybe even in some country tunes perhaps as well. Let me put a bit of a groove to this, get it your way, and then we'll talk about it. Here we go. So that's the set of changes. Might sound kind of familiar, you know, probably it's in 500 or 600 or 1,000 songs. But here's the scoop with it. We start off on this A major, and then from there we head into G major, which kind of seems a bit funny because there's no G major chord in the key center of A major. But stand true on one thing, and it's very, very common that this occurs this way, is very likely the last chord in your progression will probably be key center. If it isn't, it'll probably be one of those cadence points chords that we've talked about in the past where we have resolution off that chord to loop the progression in a full circle once again. So with that thought in mind, that very last chord, if we sort of test and operate and try to think, or, you know, by trial and error, like David wrote in the question there, we try to think about that E as possibly being a key center. It starts to kind of show us a bit of a picture possibly that in fact it could be, because we have an A which functions properly as a 4 chord in the key center of E major. 1/4 would be E traveling to A in the key of in the key of E major. Now the chord though that doesn't fit anyhow by shape or form is the G major. You know, it doesn't fit in A, it doesn't fit in E, but you have to understand theory. This is why I keep drilling the whole concept of theory. The G is functioning as something that would be referred to as a modal interchange chord. It's dropped by half a step and it's reverted quality over, so it should be G sharp minor in the key of E major, but we're dealing with a dropped chord by down a half a step and the quality's been altered and flipped to major. That's a sure sign of modal interchange in effect. In other words, what's happening is this G chord is being borrowed from the key, a parallel running key that is of E minor. So even though this progression seems to function fairly, you know, congruently in a large sense around E major, it's actually more or less like a E minor concept. Now if I go back to jamming those chords again, and I play sort of a quick run or two out of E minor pentatonic, kind of start hearing those sounds. I mean, they basically are fairly congruent. They're not 100% congruent, but they're fairly congruent to the sound of E minor, which is an underlying concept here. Even though we resolve into E major, so hopefully this is making sense to your ear that you can keep hearing the sounds of the E minor bass licks reverting into the resolution on E major. Even though it doesn't seem proper, it actually does function. And if you look into a lot of that music from the rock music from 60s and 70s era stuff, anyway, you're probably going to find that this is a fairly common situation. You'll have somewhat of a real major bass set of chords, but yet the licks and the runs and everything are seeming much more minor. So this is something to be well aware of that happens a lot, and it's one of those ideas that can really send you for a tailspin if you're just jamming on something quickly, because you can look at something and theoretically it doesn't seem to make sense immediately, but then through trial and error, you had mentioned trial and error, you try a couple of things with those lifesavers out there, which are known as the pentatonic scales, and all of a sudden you're going to make some success happen. So hopefully, David, that answers your question more or less and maybe saves your butt in the future if you're doing some jamming on stage at some, you know, jam night or whatever. So let's take a look at the next question. Okay, the next question coming up here comes to us from Kyle in Royal Oak, Michigan. Now, Kyle wrote in saying that with my band, I'm playing over simple 3 or 4 chord folk, rock, funk, reggae type progressions, a lot of stuff in G, he says here. I'm beginning to feel limited though. I hope you can explain to me some of the concepts of playing outside and how I could apply them to this type of situation. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit, because when I read an email like that, there's a lot of things that come to mind about what would be appropriate and what might not be so appropriate. Now, let's start off just talking a little bit about playing outside. I tend to think more about playing outside on sort of jazzy, jazz fusion, you know, sounding ideas. To me, that's kind of, you know, what I think is appropriate for doing outside playing. So maybe if I have a quick jam here of like an A minor chord to maybe A suspended or something, you know. So anyway, I'm just kind of jamming out here playing a bunch of rubbish basically, but some of it was okay. Wasn't too happy with most of that, but the idea is I just have sort of this vamp and I'm playing kind of in and around chord tones. I'm kind of going outside a bit, using a little bit of you might have heard the diminished scale. You know, just kind of going in and around some tones like flat fives. And also employing ideas of the major and minor thirds too. So you can kind of hear some things in there that are a little bit chromatic. Ideas that are maybe major and minor sevens, major and minor thirds, flat five notes, some flat nine, sharp five, that kind of stuff. Alterations basically, and coloring up the sevens and the thirds with, you know, them becoming both major and minor. And then of course, you know, the use of chromaticism, just doing chromatic lines. You can get away with some pretty cool sounds. So you're starting to get the idea. Now, in your email to me, you had mentioned that, what were the styles that you had mentioned again? Let me just check this out. You had said folk music, rock, funk stuff, reggae progressions. I would maybe do some of this on some rock, some funk. I don't think I would do it on reggae, and I don't think I would do it at all on folk tunes. Reggae stuff, people who are pretty heavy into the reggae sound, and especially if you know quite a few Trinidadian and Jamaican people like I happen to know, and I happen to be very well versed in that scene, you know, and know that stuff quite well. And you know, it's inappropriate in my opinion to be doing a lot of that kind of sound. Now you could check with your you know, your band leader or whatever, and maybe see if it's cool with them, and you know, if they say yeah play all over the place, then maybe, you know, go ahead and do it. If it's a different kind of fusion-y kind of band where you're fusing a lot of styles together from all those genres, maybe then it would work. I just don't know enough about your band. I would definitely steer clear of anything really weird and outside if you're just kind of doing a top 40 gig thing, playing in a few restaurants and bars and clubs. I really play the room, if you kind of know what that saying means. I don't venture out into different, you know, areas when a gig kind of calls for a certain type of thing for the audience. Another situation where I would be very careful about playing outside and using all those, you know, major and minor thirds and diminished scale runs and chromaticism and all that is if I was kind of doing a one-nighter as a session guy with somebody in their band, and if I just came in and started playing a bunch of weird stuff, I probably wouldn't get hired for the next gig. You know, if it's all jazz, well, you know, then you can just go bananas. But in your email and the question to me, jazz or, you know, jazz fusion stuff, pop jazz, none of that was even mentioned in your email. So if you're doing any kind of substitution work, you know, in a top 40 situation, let's say, for example, in your session playing, I would stay really far away from that kind of sound. It probably just will do more harm for your career than it will do any good. But I guess to summarize and give you, you know, the full embodiment of my answer to your question, I would have to say that you've really got to think about what's appropriate for the room you're playing in and for the group of people you're possibly working for, and you know, sort of play really what's appropriate for the pieces. You can start going outside a little bit, you know, like in reggae, maybe throw in a couple of flat fives. If it's a major reggae piece, maybe throw in some flat three, major three sounds. But don't go too crazy because, you know, if you get some hardcore Jamaicans listening to your stuff, they're just going to be like, what's that guy playing, man? That's, you know, they may even talk to you after you get off stage, I'll warn you now. Give you a chat about some of those ideas. So anyway, hopefully this is fairly clear. We're going to move on to the next question now, which is kind of an interesting question here from Stefan in the UK. He wrote in saying, could you provide some rules or tips or stuff that you'd recommend to every guitarist when they're gigging? Most sources are pretty much the same with their advice on this stuff. They say things like use strap locks, bring spare cables, and guitar picks and that kind of thing. From your own personal experiences, what would you recommend that is often overlooked or not considered, and why? Well, I'm going to move the video camera over to my desk, and I'm going to sort of throw out a bunch of stuff and give you some scenarios of just a few things, you know, that over the years that I always make sure that I've got in my different gig bags and stuff that I take with me to gigs. I'm going to try and cover quite a few situations. So let's move on to my other desk and check that stuff out. Well, to answer Stefan's question, we're going to divide things up into some categories: indoor gigs, outdoor gigs, and even a special category for hotels that have an HVAC system. If you're not familiar with what HVAC means, it's heating, ventilation, air conditioning. And we'll talk about why that's kind of important in a moment. But let's just begin with some general things that I think are important wherever your gig is, if it's inside, outside, or wherever. Let's start with some items that are crucial no matter where you're doing a gig. Just before we get going with some of the items that I think are really crucial that you have with you to your gigs, I would like to go through this short list that I created beforehand. Now, the first thing at the top of the list that I wrote here is know exactly where you're going. This is really important because it saves you time, and it also helps you a lot when you're transporting your gear, especially if the place where you'll be performing is quite far away from where you're able to park your vehicle. You may have to take a small collapsible dolly with you to load your gear on and transport it. This one also really ties into the second one that I wrote here. Scope out the venue you'll be performing or area of where you'll be doing your performance, either in person a day before the gig or a week before the gig or something, or perhaps if you can use Google Maps and just do it from the comfort of your studio, that would help. But you really want to get a good lay of the land where you'll be parking your vehicle. Also consider that parking lots, of course, the day of an event that you'll be performing at whatever the locale might be. The parking lot can fill up with all available parking spots. You have to start thinking about optional places to park your vehicle. Of course, there's always that luxury of you dropping your gear off right at the front doors of whatever facility or area where you'll be doing your performance, but then you're still going to have to find a place to park. That's where the next one comes in a little bit as well. Make sure you always keep loose change on you for parking, especially venues that may perhaps be in a city center locale where you'll definitely have to use a paid parking facility when you go and do your gig. Some hotels will give you a parking credit and you'll be able to just get out of their hotel parkades that way. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck paying sometimes $5, $6 in chains, in coinage, that is, to be able to park in a certain type of parking lot that'll be around the venue you'll be performing at. The last couple are pretty straightforward. Make sure if you are doing a session gig or you're a sideman on a job and you need charts, if it's necessary, triple check that you got your charts. You do not want to leave your home or your studio without the charts that you need for the gig. That's a vital aspect. And then finally, this one obviously, but it's overlooked, so I definitely put it here. Test your gear before you leave your studio or your home studio or whatever, because you could find a faulty patch cord, you could find a piece of your equipment isn't working properly. You may need to even run out to the music store and buy a new piece of equipment before you head off to the gig. So test your gear. Always test your gear before you leave your home. All right, let's move on through some of the things here that are important. I have a guitar maintenance kit where I take it with me to every gig. It's got screwdrivers, side cutters, some earplugs, some different bits and bobs that are really important to my guitar's maintenance. Flashlights are vital. I cannot stress enough that you have a flashlight as well as some kind of chart reading light. This is one of those mighty bright lights. They're about 30 or 40 bucks. I'll find a link maybe to Amazon or something so you can check these out. It's excellent, just clips right onto your music stand, and these just go right over your charts. Really good, beneficial. Extra patch cords are important. Extension cords, again, one of those must-have things. I just grabbed this orange one from the studio here. I don't think I'd take an orange one to a gig. I would definitely want a black extension cord. You got to remember that a lot of times when you go to set up your gear is going to be situated where you'll probably be standing somewhere close to where you'll be standing on the gig, and a lot of times in many venues you won't have a plug near to where you're going to be standing, so you need extension cords. Extra shoulder straps for your guitar. I always take a slide and a capo because you just never know what songs might come up. I think it's good to have a Sharpie marker or a good permanent marker with you. Of course, a tuner. Carry ample guitar picks with you. Guitar picks are crucial, of course, so keep guitar picks in your wallet, in your pockets of your pants, in your vehicle. You know, just make sure you got lots of guitar picks around, because inevitably you may leave for a gig and forget them. I also really would stress that you have a couple of different colors tape with you. I keep a green tape for left channel and red tape for right channel. You know, when you're on a stage and it's getting dark, when they're getting ready to start the show, and you've got about 25 cables on stage, it helps to mark a few of them, sometimes the ones that you need. Again, just extra patch cords here. So this is just sort of a bulk sort of allotment of things that are really important, whether you're doing an indoor gig or wherever. You know, this is sort of some of these things like lighting, of course, would be indoor specific, but of course a lot of this stuff would be for pretty much any gig. Let's quickly move over to outdoor gigs next. Well, let's talk quickly here about outdoor gigging. The first thing I want to bring up is this basically just like a sewing elastic. I'm going to grab a binder and show you what on earth this would be used for. If you're outdoors playing a gig and it's quite windy, this comes in super handy. It's just invaluable because you just wrap it around your book that you're doing your gig with, and this stops the pages from blowing away and blowing your tune away when you're trying to perform, let's say it's some real important function like perhaps an outdoor wedding or something like that. You don't want to blow it on a gig like that and to get a bad reputation for being a lousy musician. This thing you can just ask your wife, ask your girlfriend, ask your mom, find out how you can get one of those. They're invaluable for the outdoor gigs. Now, another thing that happens a lot of times outdoors is it rains, or you're in the middle of a super hot spell. Maybe it's really humid outside, and it's, you know, in July and August, at least where I live, it can get very, very hot, very humid. It's great to have a towel, wipe your forehead, or, of course, if it rains, you want to wipe your gear down and hopefully dry your hair off or whatever. So, really important. Let's move on next to the hotel thing. Now, very quickly, I just want to cover the whole idea of playing in a hotel type situation or a large facility, some type of banquet facility maybe, perhaps, where they're going to have these HVAC systems or heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, where there's just a lot of air exchange in the room. And what that can lead to, especially if you're doing backup vocals, is it can lead to a very dry throat and very dry mouth. It's not great for the gigs. Have a pack of gum with you or a can of soda pop. A lot of times at a facility that you'll play at, you're lucky to even perhaps get a glass of water out of the staff at the facility. So sometimes you're busy setting up gear, getting all your stuff organized, getting your charts up and ready, and worrying about playing the gig. The last thing that you need to be doing is running around the room trying to find a server who can perhaps offer you a glass of water. Sometimes there just isn't enough time for it. And like I was saying, in those heavy air exchange situations of the HVAC, ventilation systems in large hotels and banquet facilities, your throat can go very dry. It can be quite poor of a concept for especially doing backup vocals if you're doing that on the gig. So keep that one in mind for sure as well. Well, that's about all the time I have for today. Thanks for watching, and I got to say thanks for sending in all the great questions, and also thank you for the donations that have been sent in. I really appreciate that very much. Thank you very much. And of course, thanks for all the support of my main lessons channel on YouTube, Creative Guitar Studio's YouTube channel. It's going very well. And as a bonus, I should mention for the Guitar Blog subscribers, I'll be posting a few jam tracks each month now for improvisation practice for everybody. So watch your YouTube feed on the Guitar Blog Update YouTube channel for those. Otherwise, have a great week, and I'll catch up with you next time. Bye for now.